Hello and welcome to the Full Pour. It's Thursday. It's time to drink, talk about drinking, talk about beverages, learn about all the awesome products that are happening in the Pacific Northwest, especially as lots of parts of the Northwest are reopening now and we're able to get out there and support these businesses in person at a distance safely. So we have Andrew Byers of Finnriver joining us today to talk about ciders with a sense of place, to actually see where ciders are coming from at the Finnriver Orchard out in Chimacum, up on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington. I pointed like it's over there. You see? I'll bring in Andrew here now too. Hi, Andrew. How are you?
Oh, doing great, Erin. Thanks for having me over.
Thanks for joining us. So you were at the Finnriver entire operation. It's the orchard, it's a garden, it's the cidery, it's everything.
Held in symbiosis now, yes. What you're alluding to, I think, is that we've recently moved our production facility, and so in the backdrop you see the cider garden and some of the greenhouses for the Organic Seed Alliance, and I'm sitting on the brand new porch of our fermentation facility, which I call the fermentation station, but no one calls it that.
Good to rhyme. Always good to rhyme.
In the Chimacum Valley.
Yeah. Well, what are you? Have you popped a top yet? What are you drinking? What's everyone else drinking?
Yeah. So we started with, or we set up this 3-pack, right? And I kind of wanted to start myself off, anyways, with my Perry from 2018. Which, if you have the bottles, is the Swan. Is that the Swan? No, sorry, wrong way. That's the Goose.
Mirror images, yeah.
Right, the Goose image. And we might get to hear the geese in a second here. They're in the background, always in the orchard. But we have Lights of Fermentation Fancy. And so, starting off with a glass of Perry, there are things to say about Perry, by all means. But how do you want to play? You want to talk about the things in the glass? Do you want to talk about the things in the orchard? What would you like to lead with?
I mean, we could start at the top, and in case people watching are not familiar with Finnriver, we could just start at the beginning saying, give me your elevator pitch. So in 30 seconds or less, how would you summarize Finnriver?
Yeah. The camera, there it is. Finnriver is a values-driven company in rural Washington out on the Olympic Peninsula. And we actively stand with Black and brown people as we work to undo white supremacy in our county, in our small town, in our state, and in our nation. We build culture, and we are, in that context, a values-driven cider company.
Mm-hmm. And Finnriver's always been behind social injustices and social action, period. That's a really huge foundation of who Finnriver is.
It is. It doesn't feel new. It feels more important at the moment. Mm-hmm. But no, you're right. We have, in that notion of being a values-driven company, reconnecting people with the land that sustains them. There has always been, well, since I've been here, going on 7 years, there's been a focus on holding space to bring people into a world that is real. And so pulling people from the metropolis out to the hinterlands to put their feet on the ground, to support organic agriculture, to support streams and water quality health, and then to support the health of a diverse community that has been historically disenfranchised. And that moves in a number of concepts and ways, from our event program to our cider program to our relationships with suppliers. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I have grass allergies, and I'm sitting next to a giant field of grass, and I know it's totally uncouth, both on video and in this particular era, to just be like, but like, whoa, it's a rough time of year.
It's okay, this is real life. Please. So you said you've been at Finnriver for 7 years now. So how did you get into cider making?
I went to culinary school back in the day, mm-hmm. and was working in kitchens. And as I decided not to work in kitchens for a living anymore, I pursued a pathway into botany and field ecology with a minor in chemistry and a minor in Spanish education and a minor in American Lit. And took that random degree, and as my parents describe it, was quite downwardly mobile. And I started picking fruit for a living with some folks that I met out in New York State. And so the first fruit that I picked was apricots, and the season went on to cherries, and then it moved into peaches and apples. And as we picked the apples, it turned out I was also working for a company that was making hard cider. And this is Eve's Cidery out in Van Etten, New York. And kind of getting my grips out there as a grunt. I did whatever they asked me to do, and I went to markets, and I sold cider at markets, and I was familiar with kitchens, and so I was pretty good at walking into kitchens and talking to chefs and somms, explaining that cider, yes, indeed, had alcohol in it and could be sophisticated and deserved to be on their menu. And so that was the beginning of it for a number of years. And then I also am from the West Coast, and it makes sense out here for me. The East Coast was an adventure, but golly, it seems appropriate to live out here. It smells right. The trees are appropriate. I understand the ocean here. All those kinds of things coming together. My partner and I, we moved back out to the West in 2013, and I had lined up an interview with Finnriver at that point in time, and they were looking to grow. And so I stepped into their cider house and learned the ropes that were in production and understood my boundaries, and we went that way for some time now.
So, I forgot how to do the backdrop. Now you're into cider making, and what is your favorite part about the cider making process? If you could name, you can name several.
Yeah, being the weirdo apple guy in the back of a truck, pulling into people's driveways as the sun's going down in late October, and explaining to them that, yes, indeed, I was going to exchange money for the apples that are on their tree, and that I saw value in them. Mm-hmm. And bringing that kind of agriculture back to the forefront of a small town has been kind of amazing. And so for a number of years during harvest time, building that network of small-time hobbyist orchardists, and backyard fruit growers, and some that didn't do anything but happened to own the land where the trees were, they all, conglomeratively contribute to some of the ciders that we make. And that led me into this world of the network, the orchards around here, and this space and this culture of apples and pears here where we are. And it's just been epic. Like, not just for the people that you meet or for the adventure of picking apples as my daughter has grown up and picking apples into the back of my pickup truck, but stimulating a small rural economy with piecemeal fruit checks, a couple of bushels here and a couple of bushels there of really awesome kind of antique heirloomy kind of fruit. I really like that aspect of harvest, the network. Yeah.
I like it. That was a long-winded, healthy answer. We kind of already addressed this, but how would you say Finnriver stands out as a cidery? It's not a crowded market yet, but it's growing, and it has been growing for several years. I think you've been with Finnriver from kind of the get-go of the New World cider boom.
Yeah, I think I would like to say that cider has been made for hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's particularly hard or difficult to produce high quality cider. So I would like to take that as a given. Your cider, whoever you are, my cider, should be excellent. The fruit is there. The photons have hit the leaves. The sugar is present. We have yeast. We have tanks. Cider should be delicious, and it should be amazing. So if we move on from there, Finnriver has been a palette for me to paint from. I get to play with Saskatoon berries. People show up with habanero or fresh grown wasabi off the Oregon coast, or the cranberries that come up from Starvation Alley. Again, going into that sourcing network, the platform that Finnriver has provided for creating cider and fruit wines has just lent itself to so much creativity and so much of a growing network. As an example, there is a woman out in the Okanagan Valley who just brought her black currants to market and had her first harvest. And she called me up and was like, "Hey, I heard you all buy currants. I have 1,000 pounds, and I was hoping to get $5 a pound for them." And I had the privilege of being able to say, "Neat, I'll take all of it." And I bought her entire first harvest, and I'm pretty sure I bought her entire second harvest, minus whatever they could pull out for fresh fruit pint sales. That kind of support for small scale agriculture feels really cool. And that's what I get to take home as far as what stands out is this awesome ability to spread the good and support the small scale agricultural sourcing network.
I love that. That's I think something that rings so true in everything about Finnriver as far as marketing and public persona. That is very real to Finnriver. So as everything's kind of reopening, sort of like we had been talking about earlier, how's Finnriver adapting as different areas of Washington State are reopening, or I guess your specific area of Washington State reopening?
Yeah. Well, I think we're taking it slow. I think we'd like to be cautious. We'd like to not overwhelm ourselves, and we'd like to be able to make sure that we're being honest and supportive and loving to our customer base, as well as making sure that our employees feel safe and supported and real in their work. So we haven't yet opened. We've been doing curbside pickup, that kind of cool thing. And that's been popular enough. We've upped our game on the online sales, and that's been supported. And we are anxious to figure out a healthy and appropriate way to bring people in some modicum of calm, controlled existence to this beautiful landscape that's out behind me. And we're close. I think we maybe are looking at something along the lines of 2 weeks. I'm not going to put a specific date because it hasn't been decided yet. But we want to do it, and we want to be able to show up well. That being said, the cider making team has been in it through thick and thin. We have been chugging away on projects and a move and bringing tanks from our old facility 2 miles down the road to this new place, and kind of getting into the grooves and the crevices that exist in the new barn. And so I feel like I've been busy. Haven't had a day off, that's for sure.
I think that's kind of the problem these days. Is you nobody constantly and trying to make everything work. So you where you are right now in your backdrop and everything of the orchard, as well as where Finnriver is on the peninsula. How does place impact cider when it comes to what you're making?
Yeah, I think we're a bit young in the industry to begin to use that fabled word of terroir. We don't have our sample size is tiny. We can't quite get there yet, so we talk about ciders of place. We are in a maritime climate, very similar to that you find on the coastlines in that Normandy, Brittany, over by where Quimper is. And in that context, it's pretty good apple growing region out here. And we have mild springs and mild summers and mild falls, and we get a reasonable harvest most years. And that makes for pretty good apple country. We avoid some of the pests that the East Coast has. We avoid some of the pests and funguses that, fungi, that you see east of the Cascades in the big apple producing regions of Washington State. But we have our own troubles and struggles. In that context, we grow in really old mountains over here. These are not the volcanoes of the Cascades. These are ancient Olympic mountains that are a product of tectonic action as opposed to a product of volcanic action, I think. There's glacial till all over the place. And so there's a mineral component and a clay component that makes it very difficult to figure out where your roots are supposed to go when there's 27 inches of clay in the ground. How does that impact flavor? That's where I think we're too young. I don't think I can use my bravado to articulate a flavor profile that is unique to the Olympic Peninsula. I would need to drink Baron Nancy's cider from Alpenfire, and I would need to drink Eagle Mount cider and my own cider, and probably make 15 different vintages in the coming years, and really get analytical before I could begin to tease out, like, do we get a certain mineral character? Do my Kingston Blacks really taste like fresh grapes, or is that just in my head? I am biased because I like what grows in our orchard best, with exception to the second bottle. Can I segue?
Oh yeah, please.
This is a new release for us. It's called Sojourn, and it has a flock of Canada geese on it. And Sojourn is a traveling cider, a short travel. And so this is a bottle, Sojourn, that will change over time. This edition is Sojourn Vista Ridge, and Vista Ridge is the name of the orchard about 20 miles to the south in Quilcene. And 100% of the apples out of that orchard are in this bottle. We made one basic fermentation with a slight addition as the harvest trickled through, all indigenous yeast. The fermentation was totally spontaneous, and then we bottle conditioned with that same indigenous yeast, which is pretty impressive to me. It did not throw any sulfur aromas. It left 2 gravity points of sugar left or in the solution naturally. And so we have this beautiful bottle conditioned. If you saw the Perry, let's talk about color choices here. It's a little hard because I have a background that is not conducive to good color scheme. Okay. The Sojourn is full of these beautiful, deep, golden tannins. Bittersweet apples, some bitter sharps. And the orchard was planted with counsel from me. They asked, like, we want to plant trees that you could use to make cider. We want to sell you our apples. And I suggested that they plant X, Y, and Z apples, and that the concept would be when you harvested all of the fruit from this one orchard and you put it together, it would make a really delicious cider. And for the first few years, we got kind of a speckling of this or that, and I used their apples in our farmstead cider, and I used some of their bittersweets in our pommeau, and things along those lines. And this was the first year, 2019. 2019? Is that when this happened? Yeah. Okay, got it. The 2019 vintage came in, and we got a full about 480 gallons or so. And it is just this decadent, rich, tannic, dry ball of deliciousness. It is so baked apple and fruity. And at the same time, it's pithy, and you can taste a little bit of the green vegetal nature in it. I mean, it's blowing me away. And so Vista Ridge specifically, or Sojourn Vista Ridge, is a taste of one specific orchard on one specific hillside in a town down the road. And it's just glorious. We make a lot of cider. I'm super proud of this one. And it's what I've been drinking personally for a good 2 months.
Oh, good. Well, and whether or not you can prove terroir or actual impact of place, I think one of the things that you're talking about is that this is cider from a specific place and speaks to that place, whether or not you get necessarily a profile from it. But it is very representative of where it comes from.
100%. And it's more representative the more that our storytellers have an opportunity to explain its origins, to talk about the orchard, to talk about Terry and Karen, who are putting countless hours into that orchard. It becomes real and visceral. And so in that kind of context, yeah, orchards of place, orchards of a people, making a cider that is, well, happens to be delicious because you expect that, right? That's the bottom bar, is that your cider is going to be delicious. If it up and beyond and has something to talk about and shows something, then I feel like you have good ground to stand on to be proud.
It's interesting, the Northwest is a unique place where we grow a lot of apples, but we don't necessarily bring the people to them. You go, I mean, you mentioned New York, Finger Lakes area. Cider mills are a big part of life. The Great Lakes area, Michigan, is huge on cider mills, and kids grow up going to orchards, and that's such a way of life that we have that disconnect here in the Northwest, and I don't know how to fix it because going to an orchard is so cool. And I don't know if it's because most are a decent distance from majority of the population, but it's from Seattle to Chimicum's like 70 minutes, right? Something like that. Oh, 2 hours, whatever.
It's 2 hours no matter how you do it, right? 70 minutes if you don't have to talk about ferries.
Yeah, that's true.
But you make a good point. With the bouncing through the East Coast and even into the Southeast, there are rolling hills and small farms in a different network setup. And what you have from Washington State apples was the experience of, the experience of colonial settlement that had little pockets here, 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 and here, and then moving on to, wow, we can grow apples. This is going to be a good place. We've got irrigation. Bam, let's blow it up. And so I think it's an issue of scale. And so the apple industry of Washington State is at a much larger scale. And it's not to say that most of the small farms around here on the Olympic Peninsula also have quite a nice collection of delicious apples that they bring to farmers markets. But they aren't necessarily focused on apples in that Disney Johnny Appleseed sort of way where they're bringing you in and giving you apple pies and apple biscuits and fresh apple juice and all of those kinds of things. On the East Coast as well as on the West Coast, we've also seen plenty of stiff regulation to prevent small-time producers of juice from being able to distribute, say, like unpasteurized cider to any of their customers. And so I feel like, again, as an issue of scale, fresh apple cider is not a dangerous beverage. But when you do it from a giant production standpoint, you end up with risks that have massive repercussions. And so in that framework, we can look at how small farms would actually support a wider diversity of products and beverages to their communities without having this giant or regulations set for the giant operators. Mm-hmm. And so somewhere in there, we've lost a bit of that in Washington State. And I think that is very much what you're speaking to, is that we don't find the U-pick orchards and the great love of orchard space on that kind of like mid-level farm size out here in Washington, nearly as much as you see it in a number of regions, Michigan versus Vermont and New York.
Just a little too much, but wonderful commercial apple business happening. It takes away the romance just a tiny bit, and it's good for the industry. It's fine. So we still have one more cider left, and then you are going to take us on a cellar tour. So I don't want to hold us up, but we got the Blue Hue next.
Okay. The Blue Hue is my heavy hitter. It is the barn swallow, which, if my laptop works and it's not too irritating, I will show you one of the barn swallow nests that I can see right now in our brand new building. There are babies in the nest and the parents are flying avidly back and forth over my head. That's totally irrelevant. It has nothing to do with the site. The Blue Hue is Hugh's Virginia Crab as a primary apple contributor, balanced with Williams Pride, which is kind of a nice aromatic dessert apple. And the Hugh's Virginia is this kind of honey sweet, pithy, tannic crab apple that brings a lot to the table. We then barrel age that and combine it with blueberries typically, and that's where the blue for the Blue Hue comes from. Finnriver has a long history of being a blueberry farm with U-pick options and things like that, so we have some ties to the blueberry world. A few years back, I started buying all of the number 2 grade blueberries from the farmers that run the blueberry bog, Janet and Jeff, out at Finnriver Farm. And some years they have a whole lot of number 2s, and I get bucket after bucket after bucket. These are 5-gallon units of blueberries that aren't quite fit for sale, and they grade them out. And then other years, everything they pick seems to sell, and then the weather goes south and everything's rot. And so, pardon me, but based on agriculture, sometimes I get an amazing blueberry wine harvest, and other years I get very little. So here's a year with very little blueberry in it. It doesn't have the pinkish hue that it has had in years past. With a lot of blueberries comes a lot of acid, and so I tend to sweeten this, and this is one of our sweeter Orchard Series ciders in these 750 ml bottles. And it's pink, and it's fruity, and it's barrel aged, and it's like a very big cider. And this year, or I should say this vintage, not this year, we didn't get very many blueberries. There's maybe a gallon of blueberry wine mixed into 700 gallons of crabapple and Williams Pride. And so we stuck it in some barrels, and it came out, and it's this barrel-aged crabapple cider with a very tiny touch of blueberries to it. So it's the same cider, the same concept, but the concept showed up differently in this particular vintage. So it didn't need to be sweetened, and so it didn't. I didn't put 15 points of back sweetened sugar on it. Did I just lose you?
No, I can still hear you.
Oh, how's my video?
You're fine.
Oh, neat. My screen just went black, but now we're
fun.
So the premise there is that blue hue this year is a spontaneous fermentation of wild crab apples and Williams Pride and tucked into barrels, and it is bitter and twangy and has a Brett profile that I can't actually explain, and it is just like this swanky, beautiful dry cider that, yeah, I've been drinking a fair bit of that too in the last few months.
And so you guys were gracious enough to put together a happy hour party pack for us for this. Will that still be available at a wonderful price on your website for all three of these ciders, or two ciders and a beer?
You bet.
Great.
We will keep that going. It is the full pour cider pack, and we'll keep that available, well, pretty much as long as you tell us that it seems viable. And we'll monitor sales. You can get all the bottles anytime you want, but for the specifics of getting this particular kit, it's a 3-pack order. We've got it curated for you, it saves you the trouble. Okay, so let's see how it looks up behind me. The nest is on that hanging light. I don't think you can see it. Anyhow.
I can't quite see it, but the sentiment's cool.
I like the birds a lot. So here in the new fermentation space, I thought I would get moving, right? We've got time markings to hit. Am I doing all right? Okay. It's a new cider barn that we got to design from the ground up. And that means we made a bunch of mistakes and we learned a lot. And I swear the next time I'll build a better building. But the framework is from the slot drains down the middle and the barrels on the walls and all of those drop downs that you see behind me. Those are incredible upgrades. Finnriver is reasonably scrappy. We have, we fix equipment and we make do with what we've got, and we've been jumping through hoops for a number of years. And in that notion of jumping through hoops, we jumped through a number to get this building put where it is and how it is. And then we learned a whole lot. And I am so available to talk to folks who are about to do their own build out or their scale up. I work with South Puget Sound Community College, and we are doing a collaborative lecture on cidery build-outs this very week. And I am happy to share that information with folks. Should you be in that position and watching this and thinking, wow, I'd like to ask him a few questions, I'll talk to you about how thick to pour your cement and why the standard issue coverings on your cement are not sufficient. And I was grabbing a barrel thief. Aaron, we had talked about possibly pulling something out and getting into it. And I've got a few things that I think are pretty snazzy. Anything in particular you'd like to see at the moment?
I mean, whatever you could stage that we could see well enough and see you pull it out. And I think, I don't know if I'm sure people watching this have been on wine cellar tours and tasted from a barrel, but I don't know if they have from cider. So pretty similar premise, right?
Yeah, I imagine so. I mean, we put things into barrels and we age them, and I'll cut it down like that so you can see my work here in a moment. In these barrels, they're labeled P for Pommeau. And so I have a stack of Pommeau barrels, and our Pommeau generally ages a little over 2 years.
And how? What's the breakdown of your pommeau? Is it 2/3 apple brandy to 1/3 cider, or is it 1/3 apple juice?
Oh, it's all juice. Juice and brandy together. And we hit about 20. Is it? Yeah, about 20% alcohol, and all 20% of that alcohol is coming from 100 proof apple brandy made by a fella down the road. I haven't tried to get into these barrel stacks in this way. The fella down the road is named Jake Soule, and he works at Admiralty Distilling, or I should say he owns Admiralty Distilling, Olympic Peninsula distiller here. And he makes a lot of apple brandy for me. The folks out at Skip Rock in Snohomish also make a lot of apple brandy for me. And once I get that brandy back, we make an effort to age pure brandy at 100 proof in these oak barrels for 6-8 months before the harvest comes in. And then I have aged apple brandy. Oh, look at that. My glass is full, but I need to put something in it. Pardon me.
Chug, chug, chug.
And so the framework is to take aged brandy and mix it with fresh juice. The French put very sweet apple juice in there, so they're dessert apples. As Guillaume at Le Père Jules explained, he puts all the crap apples into his pommeau, the apples that make terrible cider. And what he meant by that was all the eating apples, which I can totally understand why one would say such a thing. These are your dessert apples with no tannic balance. I asked him about what barrels he would use to make a traditional French pommeau. And his comment was that he would ferment in a barrel for 15 years, and then he'd pull off the chimes, scrape out the inside, and then he would be willing to age brandy in it. And then after a year of brandy, he would be willing to age pommeau. So what Finnriver does is not a French pommeau. And I didn't necessarily know that until I had this conversation. But the whole premise there is that I don't believe that French pommeaus are in any way meant to show the oak or to show the barrel or the toast or the burn. Their intent is to show the sweet, round, soft apple, which I fully agree with. It's lovely. Somehow, at Finnriver, a little bit before I got here, we got on that pathway of making this like deeply golden brown, very strongly barreled and very woody bit of pommeau. We're not aging in whiskey barrels. We're aging in, nicely toasted American oak barrels. But we're looking for a lot of wood flavor. We want the creamy vanillins. We want all those subtleties that come from the wood to show in our cider. And then, again, I was following in footsteps, and that built the tradition. But we use bitter sweets and bitter sharps. We don't use the dessert apples. We don't use all the things that don't have tannins. We're using Kingston Blacks and Dabinets and brown snouts, depending on how they come in. And so our apple selection for our Finnriver pommeau is quite impressive, or I should say it has quite the pedigree, right? They're important to apples for making cider, for making a lot of things. And in addition to that, we sacrifice some of those for a couple-year aging process to make pommeau. And I think the pommeau is glorious, but it's significantly different than what you would find, in the cafes of Normandy. I don't know if there's cafes in Normandy. I mean, I've been there, but like that makes it sound like I know these things or something like that. That's not.
That's fine. There's at the cider garden at Finnriver, and that's what matters. So. Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for taking us on a tour. Congrats on the new building. It looks beautiful. Even if you think you messed it up, I think it looks great. And thank you for showing us these ciders. Thank you for showing us the birds. And can't wait to see them in person this summer when we can all get out to Finnriver at a safe distance from each other at our assigned tables.
Yeah.
And
with your masks on.
Our masks on. And
we will share with you the beauty of the Olympic Peninsula in so many different ways. Could I make a slight closing speech?
Please.
A slight closing speech?
Yeah.
We know that Finnriver cider is delicious. That's the bar that we hit at the bare minimum, right? And I was talking to one of our tasting room managers today. And they pointed out that the thing that makes it phenomenal is the human interaction, and the engagement process that happens when you are here. And I guess I would put this promise out to the world that when Finnriver reopens its doors at its cider garden to bring you here, we're going to make sure that we haven't lost that we can still offer you that human engagement, that we can take perfectly exceptional ciders as the norm, and that we can elevate your experience with the human engagement, with knowledgeable people and super passionate folks that are walking around making sure that your needs are met, and that your experience out here at our orchard is deep and fulfilling and reconnects you to the land. That's why we're taking it slow, I should say.
I love that. That's very poetic and very, I keep saying, very true to Finnriver. So we all can't wait to get back out there. And thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for what you do, Aaron. I really appreciate that too.
Oh, yeah. We try. All right. Cheers.
Cheers.